from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Thank you for tuning in. I've heard that the biggest industry in America is the showbiz industry. Have you ever heard that?
Yes.
And we kind of can see that. I don't know if it's true or not. And whether it is or not, it's clearly a big one. And we all seem to be fascinated by that world. And those of us who pay attention to it, and I included myself in by saying it that way, I don't know that I really do. But I think you know some of the names that are at the top, like Steven Spielberg. You know that name, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you know the name Edie and Lou Wasserman? Do you know them?
I did not until I got this book.
Same with me. Mr. and Mrs. Hollywood. Kathleen Sharp has written a very comprehensive book about this powerful Hollywood couple. I would say before our time, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
so let's find out about
great.
them from Kathleen Sharp. Kathleen is a journalist, a contributor to the Boston Globe, the New York Times, Playboy, which I only read for the articles, the Los Angeles Times, Elle, Parade Magazine, and she's an award-winning best-selling author whose books have been adapted for film. She's a producer too, I think, right? Didn't I read that somewhere? Mm-hmm. Mr. and Mrs. Hollywood. Kathleen Sharp, good morning. Thank you for being on our show.
Good morning. It's a pleasure.
We had a hard time getting you. You have like really high security downstairs at that hotel.
Well, I apologize, but it's so great to be with both of you.
And where are you? What hotel are you in? I mean, you don't need to tell us the hotel, but I mean, what city are you in?
Right now, I'm with family up in the Bay Area of California, Sacramento.
Oh, okay. Out there for the holiday. Where's home for you?
Home is Santa Barbara, which is burning as we speak, but under control.
Oh, yeah. Well, that area where you are was burning like a few months ago, wasn't it?
Actually, it's still burning right now, and all of December it's been on fire.
There's a new book in the works. Burning in California.
Burning in California.
Right.
No, don't do that one. Everybody's probably writing a book with that title.
Yeah.
Probably something.
Right.
So tell me, before you tell me who Edie and Lou Wasserman were, tell me how you became interested in them, and how did you find out about them?
Well, Larry, as you know, Universal Studios is one of the hottest film studios and theme parks in the world. And when it was about to be sold to a Japanese company in the late 1990s, I thought, wow, who is the guy behind Universal? No one's ever done a book on Lou Wasserman, and I think I will. And it was only after I started interviewing and trying to sit with Lou that I realized why no one had ever done a book. It's because he doesn't give interviews.
Okay. So you were fascinated simply because he started Universal Studios?
Well, he really built it. He was the godfather of Hollywood, and I'd heard rumblings that the key to understanding the secret history of Hollywood was to talk with him and his wife, who was very politically savvy. So I spent a few years kind of circling the wagons and talking to people like Cary Grant, going through his letters. Steven Spielberg was great, George Lucas, Janet Leigh, Tony Curtis, and slowly but surely, I got to his inner circle, and he did grant me an interview after a few years, so that was wonderful. Wow.
So when we say somebody in Hollywood is powerful, I always wonder, well, what does that mean? What is a powerful person in Hollywood? What is like a powerful person in politics? Well, they have the ability to start a war. That's pretty powerful. But I mean, in Hollywood, you have the ability to do what?
Well, you have the ability to be in politics. A lot of people don't understand this, but Lou and Edie Wasserman started digging that tunnel of cash that now flows between Hollywood and Washington, D.C., 50 years ago. They were very instrumental in trying to get some of their big stars, like George Murphy. Perhaps some of your listeners remember him. He was a song and dance man, very charming guy, and they helped get him into the California Senate, and he later became a U.S. Senator. But
why was that important? Why was it important for Hollywood to have a connection to politics?
Because for many, many years, Hollywood was seen as sort of this déclassé kind of tawdry industry, and they weren't getting a lot of attention from politicians. In fact, Edie and Lou started mostly as talent agencies back in the 30s and 40s. They were the ones who, for example, had Ronald Reagan as a client, or Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. But their agency in 1960s was closed by Robert Kennedy for being a huge monopoly. And it did indeed represent every single star in Hollywood. And it also had a TV arm that produced every top hit show in Hollywood.
Really?
So Robert Kennedy broke them up because they were not only representing people like Ronald Reagan, but they were producing General Electric Theater, which, of course, is a conflict of interest.
And isn't that an irony? Because the Kennedys were so adamant about having Peter Lawford in their family circle so they could have a connection to Hollywood.
That's right, yes. And Peter, of course, had all these great friends like Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack, and those were the guys who all were represented by Lou Wasserman at MCA, and they became sort of the entertainment for all the political campaigns that they held, whether it was John Kennedy or Jimmy Carter later on, and even Ronald Reagan's wonderful fundraising parties.
In the world of movie making and TV making, the one thing that is different than the world of books, and you're in both worlds, so you can probably see both sides of this. It seems like the writer is celebrated, obviously, in the world of books. In the world of movies, we don't celebrate the writer a whole lot, unless his name is Woody Allen or Nancy. What's that lady's Nancy Myers?
Yes.
Some of the people who write and produce / direct. It seems like we pay more attention to the performers, the actors and actresses.
Well, and the directors in particular, right? And that's a very astute observation. Writers are sort of a dime a dozen as far as Hollywood's concerned. Even though you talk to any movie critic, they'll say that the heart of a great movie is the story. But I think some of that has to do with the fact that it's a very male-dominated industry, and there's this idea that the director shapes the movie. And actually, that's not true. As I've gotten deeper and deeper into the industry as a producer, I realized that it's really a team effort. You need a great cinematographer, you need great producers, of course a good director, but the whole cast has to work together. People behind the cameras, extremely important, as well as people in front of the cameras. So it's this wonderful collaborative sort of industry, and if everyone is pulling in the same way, you can have a great, movie.
And is the writer included in on that? I mean, obviously the statement that the story is at the core of every movie is an important statement, but once the story is done, do they include the writer or not necessarily, or does each movie differ from the others?
Well, more and more they're including the writer. In fact, in this wonderful world of Netflix and Amazon, where you have multi-part series, the writer often is the showrunner. He or she is king, which is, great for us TV writers. But not so much in feature, although smart producers and smart directors are actually very much involving the writer in it, and some of them share credit. As co-directors.
So let's focus on the book itself. Mr. and Mrs. Hollywood is the title of the book. It's a book about Edie and Lou Wasserman and their entertainment empire. That's the subtitle. Kathleen Sharp is our guest, and she's the author of the book. So tell me, did you say you interviewed both of them?
Yes, I did. Spent a lot of time with Lou more than Edie. But I did get in with Edie's little circle. The wonderful thing about these women in the 40s and 50s is they were pretty darn powerful. They were the power behind the thrones. In fact, Edie, afternoon would open her house and have these great cocktail parties. And Polly Bergen would come, and Dean Martin's wife, and Janet Leigh, Rosemary Clooney, and then they'd, pass around little studio gossip, almost like they were dinner mints. So that was pretty,
really?
pretty fun. And they would find out what areas, what studio needed a particular actress for this role. And then Edie would start doing the squeeze on her husband and other top agents, and voila, Janet Leigh would get starring role in A Holiday Affair.
So talk to me a little bit about that selection process of an actor or an actress. It sounds like sometimes a movie maker wants an actor or an actress because they're a draw. They can make money for them. And other times, it seems like they prefer somebody unknown. Steven Spielberg doesn't always pick famous actors, but it's because they look the part, or maybe their personality seems like the character they're trying to portray on the screen.
Yes, and actually we have to divide the movie industry into two eras. Back in the 40s and 50s, the studios were churning out 130 movies a year, and everybody was on contract. But then around the 70s and 80s, it became very much an independent kind of contract business, where people like Steven Spielberg were the ones who were expected to churn out movies, and they had more control versus the studio like Universal that would distribute the movie. So back in the days of the studio heydays, they just put the faces into the the marquee as they needed them, or the names.
Oh, wow.
And the women, though, there were writers back then, there were directors. In fact, if I recall, Mary Pickford had a lot of movie savvy, but because she was a woman, she formed a company between her and Charlie Chaplin and somebody else, so she could actually move forward on her ideas.
That's right. In fact, the heyday of women working in Hollywood was the silent film era, and Universal was the place where all of that happened. Universal was a hotbed of women directors and writers. There were people like Lois Weber. She was the highest paid director at Universal at the time and directed something like 100 films. And she did a lot of films that appealed to women, social issues about divorce and independent, sexually free women. So that all changed when sound came into town, and that's because it was so expensive to have these huge speakers and equipment, and Wall Street money started pouring in, and men became the directors and the screenwriters and replaced a lot of these hot women.
Yeah, I lost you when you said sexually free women. I didn't hear anything else.
Oh, come on, Larry. I hear you kind of like that.
I mean, when we have...
Don't you play goody two-shoes with me.
When we have stories like we have lately of Hollywood people who are men who are misbehaving, I don't know,
very badly.
Sometimes it's sexually, sometimes it's innuendo, I guess. Why is that suddenly rising to the top in the news?
Well, that's a great question, and that's something that the whole country should be on the couch for. I don't know why it's happening now, because it's happened, I think Harry Warner invented the casting couch back in the 40s. But I think there's a time now, for example, with Harvey Weinstein, who was the first guy to be, exposed as a predator. He was actually losing power in Hollywood. He was no longer the big guy that you went to get a movie done. So I think that since he was on his way down, it was safe for a lot of women to come forward and accuse him of, allegedly misbehaving. But there is a fine line, isn't there, between actual abuse and flirtation. And I think we're losing that in all of this hysterical coverage, and that kind of saddens me, because a lot of guys are being accused of things that really seem kind of innocent.
Did you speak about this topic with the Wassermans?
The Wassermans, they were the old-time Hollywood. They ran the town from about 1939 to 2002. And back then, there weren't a lot of allegations of sexual misconduct, even though there were behind the scenes. But women were very sexually astute. They would bat their eyelashes and kind of use their sexuality to get what they wanted. In fact, I remember Robert Mitchum telling me a story about Ava Gardner. They were working on a movie together, and Ava was so entranced by this handsome, hunky Robert Mitchum that she practically begged him, take me behind a billboard or something, why don't you?
Wow. I believe
He
it.
said,
Yeah, but men wouldn't look at that
Wow.
as abuse. They would look at it as, oh, that's just,
An invitation.
that's because I'm powerful.
right, yeah, but
yeah.
Robert had a family at home, and he said, no way, I'm not going to do that. Suppose I get to liking it.
Oh.
Oh my God.
So,
for him.
yeah, but it was like almost, affairs or rumors of affairs were practically written into the movie contracts of these actors and actresses. It was, grist for the Hush Hush Confidential, all these magazines that went around, and it lifted the box office receipts too.
And it seemed that the young girls, even if they were underage, would be preyed upon. But there were some men preying upon young men too.
That's right. There was a famous agent who did a lot of that. A guy who, made stars out of Tab Hunter and others, was kind of famous for having his own casting couch. But back then,
I
when
need
there
to
were
get one of
studios,
them. Where do they sell them? Sell them at Kohl's? Where do they sell them? I need one.
love it.
So did you have fun writing this book? I mean, you obviously dedicated your life to this story for a while. I mean, you took a while to write this one.
I did take a while, and that's because the more I got into it, the more I realized how powerful it was. Hollywood does shape the culture. It shapes our buying patterns. It shapes politics. And eventually, it really is shaping the world. It's an international, multi-billion-dollar industry. So it was something that I just became enthralled with, and I hope you are too.
And it's wonderful that Edie and Lou seem to get along also, because sometimes when two people are powerful, one caves into the other.
Well, it was a long marriage and a very complicated partnership, and both of them came from Cleveland, but Lou was the poor boy who came from the wrong side of the tracks, and Edie was kind of the rich girl whose daddy was an attorney for one of the biggest mobs in the nation, really, the Cleveland mob. So, she fell in love with him. He was tall and handsome and very ambitious, and they had to elope. She batted her eyes. Oh boy, did she!
I don't know if this is a out of left field question, but in Florida we have a congresswoman named Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and just curious if there was a relation.
No, there is no relation, which is funny because you think it's an unusual name, but I guess it's not.
Yeah, okay. So what was the biggest revelation or the biggest surprise for you as you did the research for the book?
Well, the biggest one was how Ronald Reagan was sort of shaped by Lou Wasserman. Ronald was part of the stable of stars that Lou Wasserman had at MCA, and Ronnie Reagan really wanted to be the Gary Cooper. He wanted to play in the Western movies, and he had the charm and the charisma, but he didn't have the star power, I guess, that Gary Cooper did. So Lou Wasserman kept trying to find him, different movies, and Ronald Reagan's career was almost ruined by the last movie he did called The Killers. And that was sort of a mobster tale, and Ronald Reagan was supposed to slap Angie Dickinson 2 or 3 times. And Reagan was very worried that was going to ruin his reputation. And the movie actually was turned down by NBC. It was supposed to be a TV movie. But what Lou did give Ronald Reagan was a TV show called General Electric Theater. And Ronald Reagan was a very warm, avuncular host. He was in people's TV living rooms, every Sunday afternoon. And that is what really helped him become familiar to millions of Americans and launched his career for governorship.
So can I just focus on the statement you said he gave him the GE Theater? Okay, when we hear about somebody like Weinstein or somebody else who's powerful giving an actress a part or giving an actor a part or a director a break or something like that, aren't they really giving themselves money? Because if this actor in that movie works, then they make money. Isn't it really about, do you know what I mean? Are they really giving them something?
Well, because Lou, as an agent in the 1950s, represented all the top stars, you're right, he was giving himself 15% of whatever his clients was getting. But Jimmy Stewart almost became the host of General Electric Theater, and he turned it down at the last minute. And there were there was few other guys.
So opportunities that benefit both, I guess, huh?
Right. That benefited both. But what... Ronald Reagan became this great speaker. He would go out and talk to all the workers at the plants around General Electric
really?
industry. Oh, yeah.
Oh, is that what got him interested in the whole union thing?
He was interested in the union thing back in the 40s. He was actually president of Screen Actors Guild for many, many years. And he helped Lou Wasserman and the agency get a waiver allowing Lou to not only represent actors, but also to produce and hire them for TV. So Ronald Reagan really helped MCA become the only agency in town that could both represent actors and hire them as a TV producer.
Wow.
And that's why, Lou tried to return the favor by giving him, or finding him, the General Electric Theater job. Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. How do they like what do they feel about the Hollywood today?
What do who feel? General Electric?
No, Wasserman. The Wassermans. How do they feel about Hollywood the way it is today?
Well, Lou, of course, has passed away, and so has
okay.
Edie.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
But they both. The beautiful thing about these guys is that Lou, in particular, negotiated with every single union in Hollywood. There's 60 unions, so he was the mogul who had to make sure there was no strike. And what he made sure also is that every worker in Hollywood got the benefits of whatever the directors and the studios were getting. So as everyone's boat rose, so did the workers. And I talked to him right, I guess, 2002, and he was starting to become real worried about the political life of America and how it had changed so much. And it's so funny because he kind of created that. He thought it was too much personality and not enough policy. But that came from Hollywood.
Interesting. Wow. Interesting.
Wow. Fascinating.
Kathleen, what a fascinating story that I had never heard before. Kathleen Sharp, I have a copy of the book. It's called Mr. and Mrs. Hollywood. It's really big. Call me if you